You've probably been hearing about the death of 66 children in the Gambia linked to syrups.
WHO recommends all countries detect and remove these products from circulation to prevent further harm to patients.
The children of Gambia were dying. At first, no one knew why. Doctors were baffled by the sudden and unexplained deaths of dozens of little children. But then, a team of Gambian doctors made a startling discovery. In July 2022, Muhammad Kijera and a few other children from various parts of an African nation mysteriously start presenting to the pediatric emergency in Gambia with fever, vomiting, and general fatigue. These children would then start to have decreased urine production, ending up with a complete kidney shutdown. According to Gambian Health Ministry, by late August, around 30 children presented with precisely similar circumstances, and unfortunately, nearly all of them died. Despite the sudden spike of very similar cases across several regions of the Gambia, the WHO ruled out any alarming causes and labeled them just as E. coli infections or due to the excessive regional floods. However, by early September, the doctors detected that strangely, in all of these cases, there was one common link: an intake of over-the-counter cough syrup 5 to 7 days prior to presenting to the emergency. The Gambian authorities immediately enforced a nationwide ban on all cough syrups and launched a door-to-door campaign to collect all cough syrups from the homes of the affected children. Gambia's authorities investigated this by sending samples to Switzerland that showed unacceptably high levels of ethylene glycol and diethylene glycol. Following an additional investigation, on October 5, 2022, WHO issued a public alert identifying 4 substandard medicines manufactured by this one company, Maiden Pharmaceuticals, that contained extremely high levels of toxic chemicals DEG and EG. Usually, glycerine and propylene glycol are used as solvents in the pharmaceutical industry for liquid drugs. EG and DEG are toxic byproducts of propylene glycol and need to be cleared before the end product is ready for sale. International standards only allow 0.1 grams of DEG and EG per 100 ml of syrup. However, for cost-cutting purposes, substandard purification processes may lead to DEG and EG ending up in the final syrup formulations in toxic levels. Some have also used EG and DEG as solvents as they are half as expensive as glycerin. Since both of these chemicals are colorless and odorless, they can be really difficult to detect. But once consumed, they may set off symptoms like headaches, dizziness, and abdominal symptoms, and in lethal doses may also lead to acute kidney injury within as less as 8 to 24 hours.
The 4 medicines are cough and cold syrups produced by Maiden Pharmaceuticals Limited in India. WHO is conducting further investigation with the company and regulatory authorities in India.
Maiden Pharmaceuticals is an Indian pharmaceutical company based in the state of Haryana, India, that exports drugs to over 40 countries. Founded in 1990 with a fairly established status, it is, however, no stranger to controversy. In 2014, Maiden was among the 66 other Indian companies blacklisted by the Vietnam government for violating their quality control regulations. The founder and executives particularly were found guilty on these accounts and sentenced to 2 years of jail by an Indian court. According to data from Extended Licensing and Laboratory Node, a government-owned database, this company has been a repeat offender, having been warned at least 5 times by Kerala alone for substandard medications and blacklisted by the Bihar government in 2011. Drug makers in India, to be able to manufacture and export drugs, need a certificate of pharmaceutical product, also called as COPP, which they get only if they match the quality standards set by the WHO. Despite its shady records, the CDSCO, the drug regulator of India, issued a COPP to Maiden Pharmaceuticals for exporting drugs. In response to WHO, the Health Ministry from the Government of India assured full support in all investigations. However, in an interesting turn of events, the Indian authorities that tested the flagged products at Central Drugs Laboratory at Kolkata did not find any contamination of EG or DEG in their samples above the standard limits. While the issue still remains unresolved, the Indian government did act swiftly to launch an investigation and completely shut down Maiden's manufacturing plant due to several other irregularities, and it remains shut even to date. Similar incidences with Indian cough syrups have occurred in the past in Uzbekistan, Jammu and Kashmir, Gurugram, Bangladesh, and a few other regions. The drug regulation in India is somewhat chaotic. While the central authority, the Drug Controller General of India under the CDSCO, has the power to approve licenses and ensure the quality of drugs, the state authorities are actually the ones for overseeing the drug regulation for their own states using their own drug inspectors. This power distribution among the states is unlike in the US, where it is entirely controlled centrally by the FDA. The most reputed and stringent controller of food and drug quality in the world, the FDA, has recently been very critical of drug regulation in India. This is why they have FDA officials in India that regularly conduct rigorous inspections and sample drugs of pharmaceutical companies that export drugs to the US. The FDA also has banned many Indian companies from exporting drugs to the US and repeatedly sanctioned several others, including some very big companies like Sun Pharma, Lupin Pharma, and Torrent Pharmaceuticals. A research report from the University of Maryland also states that Indian manufacturers were likely to sell poor quality drugs to Africa due to their poor regulations and inability to conduct drug checks as the US and European countries are able to. In response to this horrific tragedy, the Gambian government appointed an independent drug inspection company from Mumbai, Control Laboratories, as mandatory for all drug shipments leaving India to the Gambia. In doing so, it was the first country to demand a pre-shipment certification from an independent agency without relying solely on the CDSCO. This incident has highlighted the concerns raised about the overall safety and regulation of Indian drugs, as not only does this put thousands of lives at risk, but it also has left a big dent in the reputation of Indian pharmaceuticals in the overseas market. This is very important from India's perspective, as similar incidents with Made in China cough syrups that resulted in over 100 children dying in Panama in 2007 led to a distrust and plummeting sales for Chinese pharmaceutical products in Central America. But why do such drug violations happen commonly in India, and how can we counter it? An investigational report in 2019 titled Drug Regulation in India showed that although the legislation of drug regulation in India is stringent, the enforcement historically has been very poor, as the rates of prosecution for flagged companies and drugs have been as low as 0.4% in states like Jharkhand. And this creates a sense of inconsequentiality for companies towards these drug inspections. And the report also states that state drug authorities responsible for drug regulation are extremely understaffed. While the ideal requirement of drug inspectors is 1 per every 50 manufacturing units or 1 per every 200 distribution retailers, in reality it is as low as 1/4 of the recommended number in states like Maharashtra and Punjab. The report also mentions that there is no properly functioning single centralized database for the data collected by the drug inspectors of different states on the companies found to be at fault, which is why it is difficult to identify repeat offenders like Maiden Pharmaceuticals. The report also recommended solutions to these issues, such as increasing the funding to these regulatory authorities, increasing the staffing capacity of the authorities, decreasing the disconnect between the center and state regulatory authorities, creating a centralized database of the drug inspection data that is accessible transparently to the public, as it increases accountability both for the companies and also for the regulation authorities, and it also increases awareness for the general public on what drugs to avoid. The Indian pharmaceutical industry over the last few decades has grown from strength to strength to become the third largest in the world by volume, with a market share of over $60 billion. And this scandal is a wake-up call for the Indian pharmaceutical industry and also drug regulatory bodies to improve their quality control standards further and maintain compliance with international regulations if they are to continue their fascinating growth story. And that's it from us. See you in the next.